Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we tackle complex source materials, cut through the jargon, and really try to transform those big foundational ideas into something crystal clear, something you can use.
Absolutely. And, when we first started mapping out this particular deep dive, our plan was, well, pretty specific.
Yeah, we were aiming for a classic management study. Alfred Sloan, General Motors, my years with General Motors, that was the target.
Right. The whole decentralization blueprint. But then we looked at the rest of the sources stacked up next to it. The philosophy, the ancient history, military tactics, even modern tech practices.
And it just clicked, didn't it? We realized pretty quickly that sticking just to Sloan wouldn't do justice to the bigger picture that was emerging.
Exactly. It demanded a much broader scope. We weren't just looking at the DNA of one company, even a giant like GM. We were looking at the underlying logic, the sort of philosophical and structural wiring that runs through almost any complex organization.
So we shifted gears. The materials basically told us we had to. This deep dive is now about charting let's call it the mind of the modern corporation.
And we're doing that by pulling together these timeless principles: organization, control, how you scale things up, how you actually execute strategy. We're connecting the dots from, say, ancient political thought right through to today's cutting-edge tech firms.
It's quite a journey we've mapped out. Our mission today is to give you that comprehensive blueprint drawn from this really diverse set of sources.
So we'll kick things off by digging into what we're calling the philosophical tension of rule, this deep conflict, really, between authority and autonomy. Then from there, we'll look at blueprints for scale and decentralization, comparing strategies from ancient empires, actually, with how modern companies handle delegation and problem solving.
After that, we get into the internal stuff, designing the internal culture of trust, looking at things like integrity, honesty, and how you handle resistance when things need to change. And finally, we'll land on strategic execution and cognitive traps. We'll break down modern goal setting like OKRs, but also look at the psychological biases that can trip up even the smartest leaders.
It's definitely a dense journey, lots to unpack.
No kidding. So let's get started right away. Let's begin with that philosophical foundation, the justification for having someone in charge in the first place.
Okay, so to really grasp the modern corporate hierarchy, you almost have to go back to Aristotle. He gives us this foundational argument for why rule is even justified.
And he uses an analogy, right? Something about the soul and the city.
Exactly, a really powerful one. He compares the city-state, the polis, the body politic, to the individual human soul.
Okay, so what does that comparison tell him about who should lead?
It leads him to conclude that practical wisdom, what he called phronesis, should be in charge. That's the ability to know what the human good is and, crucially, how to best achieve it. That part of the soul should rule the others.
So apply that to an organization.
Apply it to the state or a company or any group, really. The person or the leadership team that possesses the most practical wisdom, the best understanding of the overall good and how to get there, they should lead.
Why? What's the payoff?
Because, according to Aristotle, this setup maximizes the chances that the entire organization, the whole entity, achieves what's best for it. It's about optimizing for the collective outcome.
That makes a lot of intuitive sense for running things efficiently, doesn't it? I mean, you hire a CEO, you promote a manager, partly on the assumption they have a clearer, maybe wiser view of the company's long-term health than someone focused only on, say, their specific department's targets.
Precisely. But here's where the sources really highlight a clash, a big one. This Aristotelian justification, logical as it seems for efficiency, it runs smack into the core values of the modern world.
You mean our ideas about freedom and individual rights?
Exactly that. Aristotle's model, if you think about it, it inherently supports a kind of paternalism. It assumes the ruler knows best for the ruled. What the analysis suggests Aristotle sort of conceals, or maybe just didn't grapple with in the same way we do, is our modern, deeply ingrained value of individual freedom and autonomy.
Right. We, especially as modern professionals, we really value the right to judge for ourselves what's best. We expect, even demand, the right to act on our own judgment.
Even if there's a risk we might mess up.
Even if we know there's a risk we might make a mistake, regret the choice later. Think about a highly skilled software engineer or a top surgeon or a creative director. They don't just want to be told what to do. They want to apply their expert knowledge autonomously. That's central to their professional identity.
And that distinction is absolutely critical in the corporate sphere. Autonomy, the sources argue, is a personal value, not a subpersonal one.
What's the difference there? Subpersonal.
Well, you wouldn't worry about the autonomy of your own liver
Right.
or your arm. They're components,
Yeah.
parts serving the whole you. That's subpersonal. Okay.
But when you bring a highly specialized person into an organization, their sense of professional autonomy, their need to exercise judgment in their domain, it's intrinsically tied to their motivation, their creativity, their effectiveness.
So if you treat that brilliant R&D scientist like just another interchangeable component, like a subpersonal part,
You crush the very thing you hired them for. Their ability to generate those breakthrough insights often comes from that autonomy. Mismanage that tension, that core conflict between the leader's practical wisdom and the individual's personal autonomy, and you risk the whole thing falling apart.
which sounds like a perfect segue into Rousseau. He talks about the dissolution of the body politic, right?
It does. Rousseau draws a really sharp line. He sees the government, and again, we can think of this as executive management in a company, as a body that's separate from the sovereign.
And the sovereign isn't the king or the CEO. No, not for Rousseau. The sovereign is the embodiment of the organizational law, the overarching mission, the general will of the collective. The manager, or the prince in his terms, their power is just the public force, the company's resources, concentrated in their hands to execute that general will.
Okay, so the manager serves the mission, but what's the danger point? Where does it collapse?
The critical danger, the point Rousseau flags, where the organization just dissolves, is if the manager's particular will, their own personal agenda, their ego, their specific goals becomes more active, more dominant than the sovereign's general will.
Okay, so if the manager starts using the company's power for their own ends.
That's the killer. It's the ultimate corporate tragedy, isn't it? Imagine a division head who starts, say, hoarding the best engineers or grabbing the biggest budget slice, not because it serves the overall company strategy, but because it makes their division look good, guarantees their bonus.
Right. They're using the public force, the company's resources.
To obey their own private, particular will. Rousseau is stark here. He says when that happens, the social union, the organization, it dissolves instantly.
Because that self-interested act just shatters the fundamental trust, the assumption that the leadership is actually serving the collective good.
Precisely. And this idea feeds directly into Hobbes, who was deeply concerned about what happens when private groups, factions, start forming outside the official lines of authority.
Hobbes saw the natural state as chaotic, right? A war of all against all.
Yeah, a condition where good and evil were just measured by private appetite, by what I want. Peace, or a functioning society, a functioning organization, requires everyone to agree that peace itself is good and to submit to a central sovereign power.
The org chart, basically. The established hierarchy.
In essence, yes. A system where every subject, every employee can theoretically obtain their rights, get justice, through that established sovereign structure.
And therefore, any private leagues, any factions that try to unite strength outside those official channels?
They become immediately suspect. For Hobbes, they're usually just unlawful conspiracies. They're groups pooling their strength based on their own private appetite, maybe trying to kill a rival's project or secure funding for their own pet idea, bypassing the formal evaluation process.
So they're setting up a kind of alternative power structure, an alternative justice system almost.
And that actively undermines the necessity and legitimacy of the organization's general will, its sovereign power. It pulls the whole thing apart from the inside.
Okay, so we've got these deep philosophical risks baked in. Paternalism clashing with autonomy, the manager's ego potentially wrecking the whole show if their personal will takes over.
Right. Big risks.
So the massive practical challenge then becomes, how do you actually wield central authority effectively across, say, a huge dispersed organization, a global company, an empire, without falling into those traps? How do you scale control?
Well, for that, we can look way back. There's a fascinating model described in Xenophon's account of Cyrus the Great. He seems to have really mastered a form of controlled decentralization across his vast Persian empire. It's almost like an ancient corporate structure.
Cyrus the Great. Okay, how did he do it? He appointed governors, right?
Satraps.
Exactly.
Satraps. They were powerful figures, responsible for running conquered territories, local admin, raising taxes, mobilizing resources. That's delegation on a truly monumental scale.
But just delegating power to distant governors sounds risky. How did he stop them getting too powerful and breaking away?
That's the genius of the system. It wasn't just the delegation, it was the built-in internal checks and balances. Mechanisms specifically designed to stop the satrap's particular will from becoming dominant.
How did that work? What were the checks?
So Cyrus deliberately fractured the local power base. To stop a satrap getting too rich, raising a private army and thinking rebellious thoughts, he made sure two critical levers of power were not under the satrap's control.
Which were?
The commandants of the local citadels, the fortresses, and the captains of the military garrisons stationed there. These military leaders were appointed directly by Cyrus the king, and they reported only to him.
Not to the satrap, the local governor?
No, they completely bypassed the satrap. Think about that. It's like having an independent internal audit team or a compliance officer embedded within a modern business division, but they report directly to the CEO, not the division head.
Wow, that's deliberate friction built right into the system.
Absolutely deliberate and intentional. It creates this constant dynamic tension. The satrap runs the civil administration. The commandant controls the hard military power locally. Neither can fully dominate without the other. And both ultimately answer back to the center, to Cyrus.
That's clever. Were there other controls?
Yes. Cyrus also mandated a couple other things. The satraps had to raise local forces and train their followers, ensuring talent development out in the provinces. But, crucially, they were also required to regularly present themselves at the palace gates.
Show up back at headquarters.
Regularly. This maintained that direct connection, fostered central loyalty, and stopped the distant manager from getting, emotionally or politically detached from the overall mission.
That model, creating mandated dynamic instability, it's fascinating. But doesn't that constant friction, that rivalry between the satrap and the citadel commander, doesn't that just guarantee endless political infighting? Isn't that inefficient?
It might seem inefficient locally, sure. It guarantees some level of maneuvering. But it's dynamically stable from the center's perspective. The goal isn't perfect local harmony. The goal is preventing unchecked, localized power from consolidating and becoming independent.
So by creating these two competing power centers locally,
Cyrus ensures that the king remains the only true center of gravity. He actually leverages that localized political tension to maintain centralized control over a vast area. It's quite sophisticated.
and we see that kind of military thinking influencing organizational design beyond just structure, right?
Yeah.
Cyrus also re-engineered his actual forces.
He did. He looked at the way battles were fought and saw a problem. The old Trojan style of charioteering, using the elite warriors, the flower of the army, as Xenophon calls them.
What was wrong with it?
They could only really act at long range, throwing javelins. They looked abusive, but according to Cyrus's analysis, they contributed very little to the actual decisive moments of the battle, the close quarters fighting where victory was won or lost.
So his best guys weren't making the biggest impact.
Exactly. So he radically changed it. He implemented war chariots armed with scythes on the wheels, designed for breaking enemy lines, and refocused his elite forces on that close quarters impact. He essentially took his highest value assets out of a distant, almost advisory role and pushed them into a direct, high-impact execution role.
That's a powerful parallel for a modern company, isn't it? If you're a flower of the army, maybe your most senior R&D people or your top strategy team are stuck just advising from a distance.
They might be brilliant, but they're not driving the close quarters results needed in the market or delivering the actual technical breakthroughs. Cyrus's lesson is sometimes you have to fundamentally restructure how your elite talent engages to maximize their actual impact, regardless of tradition or comfort.
And making that kind of strategic change, or just running any tight operation, it demands incredible discipline, doesn't it? Which brings us to Sun Tzu.
Yes, Sun Tzu hammers home the absolute necessity of discipline enforcement. There's that famous story about the General Cao Cao.
The one about the crops.
That's the one. He'd issued strict orders forbidding his marching army from damaging farmers' crops, severe penalties. But then his own horse bolts, startled, and carries him right into a field trampling the grain.
Oh, wow. So he broke his own rule.
He did. And his response? He condemned himself to death, on the spot, to show everyone that the law applied universally, even to the supreme commander.
He didn't actually execute himself, though, did he?
No, his advisors persuaded him that the army needed him. So instead, he cut off his own hair, which in that culture was a profound act of personal humiliation and shame. But the message was crystal clear, and it echoed through the army. When you lay down a law, see that it is not disobeyed. Zero tolerance, starting at the very top.
That sets an incredibly strong symbolic standard. But here's the tension again, Maba. That military model demands absolute adherence, strict rules. How do you square that iron discipline with the need for, say, creativity and innovation, which often seems chaotic?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it leads us perfectly into the modern tech world, specifically the philosophy we see coming out of places like Pixar. They wrestle with exactly this.
And their answer involves delegation, but maybe a different kind.
Different flavor, yes. It's about delegation of ownership and, crucially, accepting the resulting mess. Pixar's idea is that to get rapid response, innovation, continuous creative engagement, you have to empower people at every level to own problems and, importantly, fix them, often without needing explicit permission.
This stopped the assembly line idea from manufacturing, but applied to creative work.
Precisely. Let people flag issues and tackle them immediately. This approach is underpinned by a concept that sounds academic, but is really practical. Stochastic self-similarity.
Okay, break that down. Stochastic self-similarity.
It basically means that big problems and little problems often have similar underlying structures. They're like fractals. The complex web of issues causing a massive system failure might actually mirror, in its structure, the causes of a tiny, seemingly insignificant bug in one small piece of code.
Right. So problems look similar at different scales.
Exactly. Now, what do most managers do when they're overwhelmed? They draw a sort of horizontal line. They say, okay, I only have time for the big problems above this line. They ignore all the small stuff below it.
Makes sense. Prioritize.
Seems logical. But if the problems are self-similar, if the small problems mirror the big ones, ignoring all that small stuff means you're actually ignoring the vast majority of opportunities to learn about and fix the fundamental, recurring structural flaws in your system or process.
Ah, I see. Because the patterns repeat.
The patterns repeat. So pushing ownership down, letting people tackle those smaller problems addresses a much larger volume of issues and generates way more learning about the system's weaknesses. It also makes the organization faster because you're not waiting for senior management approval for every little fix.
And it also lowers the fear of failure, presumably, because a small failure is just data.
Exactly. It's localized learning, not an existential crisis. But, and this is the crucial part that connects back to risk, you have to accept that this process, especially innovation, inherently creates mess.
The source had that great anecdote about the Pixar software developer.
Yeah, the one who quit. He was working on this groundbreaking new animation software. Huge technical risk, very exciting. But his day-to-day job involved constantly fixing all the little glitches and problems the new software itself was causing.
He wanted the big risk, not the cleanup job.
Right. He loved the thrill of building the revolutionary thing, but he hated dealing with the inevitable, messy complications that came with it. The lesson there is profound. If you commit to taking big, innovative risks, you must also commit, culturally and operationally, to dealing with the continuous, often frustrating, sometimes demoralizing mess that results.
The mess isn't a sign of failure. It's the price of admission for innovation.
Perfectly put, the mess is the cost of the risk. You can't have one without the other.
Okay, so we've moved from the big structural designs for stability, like Cyrus's system, to this idea of fractal problem solving and embracing the messiness of innovation, like at Pixar. That naturally leads us to the human element, the internal culture that makes all this possible.
Right, because if you're going to delegate risk, empower people, and deal with the inevitable mess, you absolutely cannot lead with fear. It just won't work. The antidote, especially when things are uncertain or highly creative, has to be trust.
And trust isn't something you can just declare, is it?
Not at all. It has to be built. Patiently, brick by brick, authentically, consistently. And probably the biggest test, the most powerful signal of whether trust is real, is how management responds when things go wrong, when people fail.
If failure gets punished publicly or swept under the rug,
trust instantly evaporates. People stop taking risks, they hide problems, communication shuts down. It's toxic.
And related to that is the issue of secrecy, right? Managers who hate surprises.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic control mechanism that destroys trust.
Yeah.
The manager who demands to be briefed privately on any bad news before the rest of the team hears it, they think they're managing information, but they're actually creating fear.
How so?
It leads to this culture of pre-meetings before the real meetings, endless rounds of careful message crafting. People feel like they're constantly walking on eggshells, trying to figure out how to deliver bad news without upsetting the boss. All the energy goes into managing the manager's emotions, not solving the actual problem.
And it slows everything down.
Massively. The irony is, the source material argues, the opposite instinct works better. When a manager is genuinely candid, when they share difficult or uncertain information transparently with the team,
What happens then?
it signals trust. It says, I believe you can handle this. I value your input. We're in this together. It gives employees a sense of ownership, not just over their little piece, but over the bigger picture, the shared information, the shared problem.
And counterintuitively, maybe they're even less likely to leak sensitive information if they feel trusted.
That's the argument. If you treat people like responsible adults who are part of the inner circle, they feel a greater sense of loyalty and responsibility to that information and the collective goal. But building this trust, driving out fear, it's not just about how managers behave downwards. It's also about managing resistance from people who might actually prefer the old way of doing things.
Ah, yes, the resistance to change. The Lucasfilm story is a fantastic example here.
It really is. They developed this early, truly revolutionary computer-based video editing system. George Lucas was pushing for it. Technologically, it was miles ahead.
But the users, the film editors, didn't want it.
They flat out refused to use it. These were highly skilled professionals who had spent years mastering the existing craft, physically cutting strips of film with razor blades, taping them together. It was tactile, intricate work they excelled at.
And the new computer system threatened that mastery.
Completely. They valued the comfort and identity tied to their existing skills, their hard-won expertise, more than they valued the abstract promise of long-term revolutionary change offered by these unfamiliar digital tools.
So it wasn't just about learning something new, it was about fear. Fear of what exactly? Losing their status.
Fear of losing their competence, their identity. Fear of being beginners again, of looking clumsy or slow while learning the new system. Their professional pride, their sense of mastery, was deeply threatened. And because they, the primary users, refused to buy in, the whole project, despite its technical brilliance, had to be scrapped.
Wow. So the lesson is you absolutely have to get buy-in from the people who will actually use the new thing, understand their fears and motivations, or even the best technical solution is dead on arrival.
Dead on arrival.
Yeah.
You have to lead the change with them, not just impose it on them. And this need for proactivity, for taking ownership, it applies upwards too.
You mean managing your boss?
In a way, yes. The source material references the philosophy from the Navy SEALs, their concept of extreme ownership. Their take is startlingly direct. If your leader isn't giving you the support you need, if they're resistant, if they're not making the right calls from your perspective, don't just blame them.
What do you do then?
You look in the mirror first. Ask yourself, what could I be doing better? How can I clarify the situation more effectively? How can I educate my leader on the realities? How can I influence them better? How can I frame the request or the information in a way that helps them make the right decision to enable me to win?
So you own the entire situation, including your leader's understanding and decisions?
Exactly. You are responsible for leading everyone in your sphere of influence, subordinates, peers, and superiors. It's a radical level of self-reliance and responsibility.
Which loops us back nicely to Stephen Covey's ideas about character being the foundation for all of this.
It does. Covey draws a crucial distinction between leadership and management.
It's the difference for him.
Leadership, he says, is this high-level, right-brain activity. It's about vision, direction, philosophy. It asks the ultimate questions, like, are we even climbing the right ladder? Are we in the right jungle?
Okay, the big picture, the why.
Exactly. Management, on the other hand, is more left-brain. It's about efficiency, execution, systems, sequencing. How do we climb this ladder efficiently? How do we organize the expedition through this jungle?
So strategy versus tactics, almost.
Sort of. His maxim captures it well. Manage from the left, lead from the right. You need both, but they're distinct functions, often requiring different mindsets.
And underpinning both for Covey is integrity.
Yes, but he defines integrity in a very specific way. It's not just honesty. It's the ability to make and keep commitments to oneself based on one's values, using what he calls independent will.
Independent will.
It's that internal power, that self-discipline to subordinate your feelings, your impulses, your moods to your deeper values and principles. It's what allows you to follow through on your commitments, even when it's hard or uncomfortable.
So it's the engine of self-mastery.
Precisely. It's the core discipline that allows a person to be, in his words, a disciple of their own deepest convictions, rather than just reacting to circumstances or emotions. And connecting back to Rousseau, it's this internal independent will, aligned with values, that ideally keeps a leader's particular will in check, ensuring they don't misuse the public force for purely selfish ends.
Okay, so we've laid the philosophical groundwork for rule, looked at blueprints for scaling organizations, and dug into the cultural importance of trust and integrity. Now, how does a well-led, well-structured organization actually translate all that into measurable results? How do they execute effectively?
Well, a key tool in the modern toolkit, highlighted in the sources, comes from the tech world. specifically Intel and famously adopted by Google. Objectives and key results, or OKRs.
Right, OKRs. We hear about them a lot. How do they fit into this picture?
They're crucial for focusing large, often very dispersed organizations. Think about Google Search, Android, YouTube, Maps, OKRs help align all those massive, complex efforts. They provide clarity on what matters most.
But it's not just about setting goals, is it? There's a nuance in how they're set.
A critical nuance. The framework explicitly distinguishes between two types of OKRs, committed versus aspirational. And understanding this difference is vital for managing risk, resources, and frankly, psychology.
Okay, tell us about committed OKRs first.
Committed OKRs are the must-dos. These are the objectives the organization collectively agrees will be achieved. There's no ambiguity. The expected score on a key result for a committed OKR is 1.0, meaning 100% completion.
So failure isn't really an option here.
Failure requires a serious postmortem. If a committed OKR is at risk, it triggers immediate attention, resource adjustments, whatever it takes to get it back on track. These demand really solid planning and reliable execution. They're the bedrock deliverables.
Okay, makes sense. Now what about aspirational OKRs?
These are the big, hairy, audacious goals, the stretch goals. They describe how the organization wishes the world would look, maybe a huge market shift or a technological leap. But crucially, when they're set, there might not be a clear path to achieving them, or even the necessary resources allocated up front.
So you expect to maybe not hit these?
Exactly. They are deliberately set very high. The expected score might be closer to 0.7, maybe even lower. Success is defined as making significant progress, pushing the boundaries even if you fall short of the ultimate target.
So this dual system does something important psychologically.
Absolutely. It creates psychological safety. It tells teams, look, you absolutely must deliver on these committed goals. That's non-negotiable. But for these aspirational ones, we want you to shoot for the moon. It's okay to try really hard and not quite get there. We encourage that ambition.
No.
It separates reliable execution from ambitious exploration.
That's a clever way to manage both stability and innovation. But even with perfectly structured goals like OKRs, organizations are still run by humans.
And humans, as the work of Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman powerfully shows, are prone to systematic cognitive biases. Our thinking isn't nearly as rational as we like to believe, and these biases can completely derail even the best strategies and goals.
This is his System 1 and System 2 thinking, right? Fast and slow thinking.
That's the core idea. System 1 is our fast, intuitive, automatic thinking. It generates quick impressions, feelings, gut reactions. Most of our thoughts originate here. System 2 is our slower, analytical, effortful thinking, the conscious reasoning part.
So what's the problem? Don't we use System 2 to check System 1?
We're supposed to. But Kahneman's point is that System 2 is often, well, lazy. He calls it the lazy controller. It requires effort to engage System 2. So often it just defaults to endorsing the impressions and intuitions served up by System 1 without really scrutinizing them.
Can you give an example of how that laziness trips us up?
Sure. Think about cognitive ease. If something is presented clearly, maybe in a nice, easy-to-read font, or if a statement rhymes, or if it just feels familiar, our System 1 generates a feeling of ease.
Okay.
And a lazy System 2 often mistakes that feeling of ease for a signal of truth or accuracy. We might approve a proposal just because the PowerPoint slides looked really slick and professional, creating cognitive ease without deeply analyzing the underlying assumptions.
Wow. So superficial things can sway our judgment without us realizing it.
Definitely. And this ties directly into another huge bias, overconfidence. Our subjective feeling of confidence in a judgment or a plan depends mostly on the coherence and quality of the story we can tell ourselves based on the information we have right in front of us.
The story we tell ourselves.
Kahneman calls this the WY-SIAD rule. What you see is all there is. We build these compelling narratives using only the evidence that's easily available and visible to us. You know, our project plan looks solid, our team is smart, our initial results are promising.
But we ignore what we don't see.
Precisely. We systematically fail to account for critical missing evidence, especially external factors, what competitors might do, unexpected market shifts, unforeseen technical hurdles, things that aren't in our neat internal story. This leads to that classic solutioneering trap, where we become utterly convinced our internal plan is brilliant and fail-proof, ignoring the base rates of failure for similar projects.
Which leads directly to the infamous planning fallacy.
The planning fallacy, yes. Our chronic tendency to create overly optimistic timelines and budgets, based entirely on our internal best-case scenario, while ignoring historical data about how long similar projects actually take.
Is there a cure for this? How do we fight it?
Kahneman prescribes taking the outside view. Deliberately ignore the specifics of your internal plan for a moment. Instead, find data on similar projects undertaken elsewhere. What was the typical outcome? How long did they take? How often did they fail or go over budget?
So anchor your forecast in external reality, not internal optimism.
Exactly. If, say, 90% of comparable software projects in your industry take twice as long and cost 50% more than initially planned, you need a very good reason to believe your internal forecast of finishing on time and on budget is realistic. The outside view forces your analytical system 2 to confront the statistical reality rather than just endorsing System 1's optimistic internal story.
That's a powerful corrective. Okay, so we have goals, we have awareness of bias. What about the ultimate purpose behind all this execution? We have Cicero in the mix too.
Yes, and Cicero brings us back to the philosophical dimension, but with a focus on action and ethics. He argues that wisdom, knowing things divine and human, is the highest virtue, yes, but it's incomplete, maybe even flawed, unless it leads to action.
Not just contemplation, but doing things.
Doing things, specifically action that demonstrates care for humanity's well-being, for the public good. For Cicero, our duties of justice towards our fellow human beings, our colleagues, our customers, our society, should actually take precedence over purely intellectual pursuits. The philosophers should put down their books to help a friend or serve the state when needed.
And he connects this to motive, doesn't he? He distrusts wealth.
Deeply. He warns that our moral sense gets easily corrupted by the admiration of wealth. For him, the crucial question when evaluating someone, especially a leader, shouldn't be how rich are they, but what sort of a man is he? What are their character and motivations?
Which brings us full circle back to Rousseau's warning.
Absolutely. If a manager's particular will is fundamentally driven by a desire for personal enrichment, by that admiration of wealth Cicero distrusted, then their leadership is inherently corrupted from the start. And according to Rousseau's logic, that organization, regardless of its clever systems or well-defined OKRs, is ultimately destined to dissolve. The foundation is rotten.
Wow. Okay, this has been quite the journey. We started thinking about Alfred Sloan, but ended up spanning millennia, from Aristotle's justification for rule all the way to modern cognitive science and OKRs.
We really did. We looked at Cyrus the Great, creating stability through controlled friction, that fascinating check and balance system with the satraps and commandants.
And then Pixar's very different approach, embracing the inevitable mess that comes from delegating real ownership and taking risks, building a culture on trust, not fear.
And threading through all of it, this major revelation seems to be that the mind of any successful large organization, ancient or modern, is constantly grappling with one fundamental tension.
Which is?
It's that perpetual balancing act between central authority, the need for a clear vision, a guiding strategy, Rousseau's general will, and local action and autonomy. The need for individuals, especially specialists, to have the freedom to solve problems, use their judgment, and act with Covey's independent will.
So putting it all together, effective organization isn't really about finding some single revolutionary system, is it? It seems to depend more on mastering these timeless principles.
I think that's right. It's about things like deliberately building internal checks on power, so management's particular will doesn't hijack the mission. Actively fostering trust and candor instead of fear and secrecy. Cultivating that sense of independent will and responsibility in your people.
And measuring progress rigorously, using both those grounded, committed goals and those ambitious, aspirational ones to drive performance without killing innovation.
Exactly. Now, we established early on, drawing from Rousseau, that the whole corporate body collapses the moment management's will detaches from that general will.
And we also heard Aristotle's point, amplified by modern experience, that autonomy is deeply personal, especially for highly skilled experts. It's not a subpersonal feature you can just ignore.
Right. So that leads us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to maybe wrestle with. It's perhaps the deepest challenge facing complex organizations today.
Okay, let's hear it.
If the very essence of innovation and high performance in so many fields relies on giving those high-value specialists real professional autonomy, the freedom to act, maybe to fail, to own the results in the mess,
Wow.
then how effectively can any highly specialized modern corporation actually function without being in a state of constant confrontation with that inherent tension? The tension between maximizing the overall organizational good, as the leadership defines it, and maximizing the professional autonomy demanded by the individual specialist.
Because those two things aren't always aligned naturally.
They're often in direct conflict. Managed poorly, That tension leads straight back to Hobbesian factions and Rousseau's dissolution. But managed skillfully, perhaps that very tension is the engine.
The engine of dynamic stability and continuous innovation.
Maybe. That's something to think about.
Indeed it is. A perfect place to leave it for this deep dive. We hope this blueprint gives you some tools to, as Covey might say, lead from the right and manage from the left.
Until next time.